It's Friday, the 11th of August, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridlin and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridlin, the editor of Pod News in Brisbane, Mianjin.
And I'm Kyrin Down, host of the Mere Models and the Value for Value podcasts, also in Brisbane, Mianjin.
In the chapters today, good news, bad news, financials sound good, but consumption doesn't. Also, the Russians are coming and advanced audience demographics for podcasts, plus live ones, Rob Ellin on the future of Kast Media, and more.
We made it clear to them, you cannot move with a fistful of anger, right? You have to move over where you're truly in partnership with us, and all of us want to grow and build together and do something great together.
This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,077 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support, and now AI to help you publish your show. And by Pod News Live in London this September. Tickets are available right now at podnews.net/live.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, Sam Sethi is away this week on another holiday. So we're joined by Kyrin Down this week. Thank you so much for joining us, Kyrin.
Oh, my pleasure, James. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you're here. We're both in Brisbane, Mianjin, so we should probably start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we both are today, the Turrbal and Jagera people. We will pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I think it's particularly right on a podcast to do that, given that they have a proud history of telling their stories by word of mouth, which is what a podcast is, I guess. This kind of reminds me of Adam and Dave recording Podcasting 2.0 when they were at Podcast Movement in Dallas last year. And Dave was on floor 13 and Adam was on floor 26 or something.
Yeah.
They didn't even bother to get together in the same room. And that's exactly what we're doing as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's we have tried it in live once before, but it was even a bit different because we were out in South Bank. So we that one was with all the noise and sounds of Brisbane.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and that was on video too, which we're not on video. All I can see behind you is a very nice map of South America, which is very smart. So, Kyrin, for those of our listeners, if there are any who don't know who you are, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Kyrin. I suppose you would call me a podcaster nowadays because that's what I spend most of my time doing. The actual inspiration for wanting to start one was when I was traveling and I would chat with my friend Juan all the time via Skype. And it was just one of those times where it's like, we should have recorded that. So when I came back, I started to get into it. And once I started one, I guess I think it's a thing. If you really start getting into it, you want to start creating more and more, as we'll find out at the end of the episode with you as well. So I just kept going, and I think I actually met you not long into my journey when you were doing a presentation in the ABC building about podcasting.
Oh, yes.
So that was how we got connected initially.
Yes, that was a long while ago. So you make the Mere Mortals podcast and a bunch of other ones as well. You had me as a guest on Mere Mortals, and then you had Adam Curry as a guest and Sam Sethi as a guest, and you properly do your research as well. I seem to remember you're one of the only people I've been on a podcast on where, crikey, you have read virtually everything that I've ever written. I think
that is definitely not true, but I try and get to the main bits and pieces, and I like to, I suppose, try and ask some questions which maybe haven't been asked before, and you'd particularly notice this with Adam Curry, for example. I mean, everyone wants to ask him about MTV, and I think when I had him on, I didn't even ask him about that. So it's definitely, I feel it's like a sign of a good show and also of respect, or at least that's the way that I like to do it. Yeah.
Well, I think it was definitely a good thing. So the Mere Mortals podcast, you also do a number of others, don't you?
Yeah, so there's the Mere Mortals book reviews, pretty self-explanatory. That's just books that I'm reading and I talk about. And the Value for Value podcast is, I suppose, the other one that I'm really working on, which is, investigating the philosophy of it, how people are using it in their podcasts, and even expanding that out into books, perhaps, and even to music, as we've seen recently. And I had another one, which was book reviews in Spanish, and I stopped doing that because it was really hard.
But you speak Spanish perfectly.
And not perfectly. I'm pretty good at it, but it's certainly not fluent. Fluent is a whole nother level.
Well, let's get going for this week then. What's making news?
Yeah, so there's lots of good financial results over the past few weeks, James, but also lots of numbers showing that podcasting is shrinking. What is up with that?
What is up with that? So firstly, lots of really good financial results. iHeartMedia releasing theirs, podcast revenue up 25% quarter on quarter, 12.9% year on year. Also, Kast announcing its quarter 2 23 financial results. They show net sales growing by 22%, North American sales up by 31%, which is nice, to an unfathomably large amount of Swedish crowns, 110.7 million of them, which is very exciting. It's 84.5 million US dollars. And Odyssey as well, releasing their quarter 2 23 financial results. They were a little bit more quiet. They didn't even bother to do an earnings call, but they did say that revenue per 1,000 downloads grew by 38%. But that's about as much of the podcast numbers as we got. So numbers in terms of revenue going up, but numbers in terms of consumption, well, maybe going down. Podtrac says that the average US monthly audience was down 3% year on year. Listen Notes saying that the number of new podcasts launched last month was, a third fewer than a year ago. And Podcast Index also saying that the number of active podcasts has been decreasing since April. Kyrin, do you think there's anything to worry about here? Do you think there are fewer podcasters, fewer listeners?
I was actually wondering if there's been a really good snapshot of what happened during the COVID period, because now that it's all over, you can kind of sweep away the dust and see what really happened. So, going from March 2020 to say March 2022 or 2023, I would be really interested to know what actually happened then, because I think there's some counterintuitive things. I would have thought, if people aren't working as much, they would actually be listening to more podcasts, but it was actually the opposite because they weren't traveling, that they weren't, or as far as I'm aware. So I would have thought, and I saw this, there was a lot of podcasts popping up like Quarantine or Tea Time or Quarantine. There was so many of those popping up, which I'm guessing that they're gone now that people have that time back, that they are actually perhaps working a bit more than they were during the COVID period. So
I mean, some people say that obviously the pandemic is still with us, which it kind of is, but some other people are saying that the pandemic ended to all intents and purposes more than a year or so ago. So we probably shouldn't be seeing tremendous effects on the numbers. But I mean, from my point of view, I'm not sure I see fewer podcasters and less consumption going on, but clearly some of this data seems to show that.
Yeah, I think the problem with this, it's always just hard to tell, right? It's so difficult to know. You can't just look at another show and see their numbers, so you can't even feel it in the shows that you normally listen to and see, their stats are going down or not. So yeah, it's kind of like the black box of podcasting, which is always, you never really know what's going on.
No, you never do. I guess, OP3 changes a little bit of that, where at least some of the data is open. You can find a ton of those shows on the Podcast Business Journal, podcastbusinessjournal.com/data. And I kind of wish that if you are publicly funded, maybe you get your money through Patreon, maybe you get your money through, taxes like the ABC or the BBC does, then maybe part of the stipulation of that is that you must publish your figures. That would be a rather a nice thing. Not quite sure how they would go with that, but anyway, so maybe that's a plan. But yeah, I would say, it's very difficult to see some of those numbers apart from the Podtrac data, and perhaps that might be a conversation with Mark when I'm over at Podcast Movement with the folks at Podtrac to actually see whether or not there's something we can have a look at in terms of how podcasting was changed during the pandemic. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to see that.
You've given me more work to do there.
More work.
Kyrin, so thanks for that.
Apologies.
What else is going on?
Yeah, so moving on. 2 shows were removed from Apple Podcasts after Russian authorities requested their removal. James, are we all going to be banned from Russia?
Well, Pod News is already not available in Russia.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? How come that is a thing?
Well, because if you remember all the way back in February 2020 when Russia illegally invaded the Ukraine, one of the things that the American government was quite keen on is that everybody stopped doing business in Russia. And so Pod News is an American company. So therefore I thought, right, well, I better follow whatever the Americans are telling me to do. But actually, it was rather helpful because quite a lot of the hacking attempts on the servers come from Russia and from Belarus, who are the 2 countries I've turned off. So they can actually see nothing of it, which is interesting. But and Apple also did quite a lot of things where they have pulled back in terms of Russia. I don't think you can buy their hardware there, or they've certainly closed all of their stores and all of that kind of thing. But clearly, Apple Podcasts is still working. Because they had a complaint from the Russian government basically saying, no, you need to pull these 2 shows down, or at least those 2 shows down. What Happened, which was published by Medusa, and another one which is called Chill, which was removed as well from Holod Media. And they both were removed apparently because they were saying naughty things about the Russian army, and they are both officially banned media organizations there. And in fact, it turns out, Kyrin, that Apple was actually fined in the Russian courts for not deleting content with what they called incorrect information about the conflict in Ukraine. They were actually fined. Have you any idea how much they were fined by the dastardly Russians, given that Apple is one of the richest companies in the world?
Oh, well, with that information and that layup, I got to feel that it's probably a slap on the wrist of, I don't know, $5,000 or something.
Exactly, $4,000.
Wow.
Exactly right. So
that's not even a slap on the wrist. That's a finger snap. It's a pinch.
Yes. Well, I was told once when the no smoking laws came in the UK, which must have been 15 years ago now. Every single shop had to put a big sticker, ugly sticker on the door saying no smoking. That was part of the law, that you had to put this ugly sticker on the door, and you were fined. I think you were fined something like £600 if you did not have that sticker on the door. And Apple said, no, that sticker is too ugly, and we're not going to put it on the door, and we'll just pay that £600 a day or whatever it was as a tax, just to, yeah, bless them. So it's really interesting. I'm wondering, of course, what that means in terms of the podcast index. I'm guessing that the podcast index wasn't asked by the Russian government to take those down, but there's clearly, conversations going on there. I'm also curious. I know that Apple has a separate podcast directory that it feeds people in China because of the Chinese government has a very similar rule. And I'm wondering whether or not Apple can actually feed different shows to different places. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, had a look into that.
No, I haven't. I didn't even know that about the Chinese one. Is that one that you can see? So is that publicly available? So you can find out what shows are and aren't being highlighted? Yeah,
I think my understanding with the Chinese one is that it's allow listed. So basically, it's a list of shows which are made available on the Apple Podcasts directory, but basically not very many other people get on. So it's a very small one, is my understanding. But who knows? But you can kind of, I know that the details that you get from the Spotify API are that you can turn on and off individual countries. And I'm wondering whether or not that's something which is available to normal, I was going to say to mere mortals, to normal people, to work out whether or not they can actually say, no, I don't want this particular show available in this particular country. But fascinating, censorship stuff, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I always think that there's the actual ability to access it. There's a tier of people like yourself who are programming savvy and can actually do it.
Yeah.
And then people like myself who, maybe they could, but it's just not going to happen.
Well, maybe. Who knows?
So let's continue on. Live One is continuing to move over shows from Kast Media. There was a story in Pod News last week talking about Kast Media. What's that, James?
Yeah, there was. So I caught up with Rob Ellin from Live One a few days ago before their financial results were announced on Thursday. And I asked him how the deal was going, and I learned a little of the backstory of what's going on.
This is a big opportunity for video, and the acquisition of assets from Kast had a lot more video than us, has really expanded our video dramatically. We just announced More News, which is an amazing show, like an SNL type show I love. Right. And it's so much fun and so much action, and the video side of it is really exploding.
How is that acquisition of certain assets of Kast Media? How's that going, Rob?
Well, this is a very tricky, when we bought Podcast One, it was a distressed asset. Luckily, they had Norm behind it, so they had unlimited money. He could bail them out each time. But this is such an early stage for this industry. And Colin's a wonderful guy. He's super talented. But he got himself caught in a rough situation where the banks pulled out, venture capital pulled out, investors pulled out, and there was no money left for these small companies. And unless you sold to Spotify or Apple, which all those companies they bought were losing their shirt too. Today you're watching, whether it's Odyssey, whether it's iHeart, there's a lot of pain going on. And if you have debt, you're in pain. But if you can't get money, you're in a lot of pain. So we stepped in and we said, hey, this guy put together one of the greatest lineup in podcasting. Just think about it. Theo Braun and Rob Dial and Brendan and Whitney. And it's just a massive lineup. And you got to give them a lot of credit, but you also got to help them. We couldn't just step in and help them and bail them out of the problem. We had to slowly try to fix as much as we could. And so we've almost stepped in as like the dip financing. Whoever wants to come and be a real partner and change the economics where those MGs have gone down and the 80-20 deals are over for life, right? They're never happening again, right? They got to be fair deals that both partners can make money. And we've done terrific so far. We've announced, a couple of, including More News. Millions of dollars are moving over. We said it could be as high as 10 million. And I would say we'll be halfway there shortly. And there's no reason we can't get all the way there. And, we've spoken to every podcaster. We've offered them really fair deals. We've offered them equity in our IPO to help them. They got to decide, for themselves whether or not they want to go to another platform. No other platform is going to pay them for the past. They're only going to work with them in the future. And my guys, as you know, our guys, Kit, Eli, and Sue are the best in the business. They run this like Moneyball, right? It has to be a win for everybody. And so we're gonna continue to do that. And I really hope more podcasters come over. I really hope, even if they just come over for the distribution platform, right? They could get paid now. Why are you trying to figure out where you're going? Move over. We'll run it for you. We'll help you. If you get to know us well and you get to see what we do, nobody's going to deliver more than us. You're not going to see a small company that is more entwined and entrenched with their creators. We're a white glove, hands-on partnership, 360 play for the creators. And we're going to keep holding their hands and we're going to keep growing with them. And that's why almost no one ever leaves, right? And, we've gone through tough times at Podcast One, before we acquired it. And obviously, COVID lasted longer than we thought. And we haven't raised a dime for it, right? We raised a small amount of money last year, pre-IPO, just to continue to do this. And I think you're going to see more and more of it. You'll see announcements any minute now that will showcase great talent moving over. And they're not moving over, we made it clear to them, you cannot move with a fistful of anger, right? You have to move over where you're truly in partnership with us and all of us want to grow and build together and do something great together. And if we do something great together, we make history together, you're going to make your money back in some.
Rob Ellin from Live One speaking to me a couple of days ago. I think what's clear there is he really believes that he's buying some of the shows, but he's not buying Kast Media as a company. And to me, it sounds as if Kast Media is probably a little bit over. There's loads of allegations out there about Colin Thompson from, some people. I don't know enough about those. I mean, clearly there's an awful lot of excited language being used, but there's a more complete interview with Rob in the Podcast Business Journal today. You can get that in your inbox or see it on the web at podcastbusinessjournal.com. Do you think, Kyrin, not necessarily talking about Kast Media and Live One, but do you think we will see, as Rob was talking about there, more consolidation in podcasting, as we go forward?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I guess when you're doing it as an independent, like myself, it just feels natural. It's kind of part of your lifestyle. It is, I've got my studio room set up and I just come in and do my things as I go. And there's no ever real thought been in my mind about, joining a podcast network or doing that sort of thing. But then I hear stuff from the other side when I do meet some people who work in media, and it is very much in their minds about, having a quick exit or doing something like that, where it is there is a real directing, driving purpose for what they're doing, and they are trying to make a, I guess what you would call like it's really based on financial decisions rather than perhaps the love of it. So yeah, it's very much I'm in my own world, so it is hard to tell what other people are doing outside of it. What about you, James? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly think as we're seeing there are quite a few deals which have dried up in terms of making easy money very, very fast with podcasting, and that's, as you say, I think that's probably a good thing. People who are in it just to make the money make a very different product than people who are in it because, they want to make a good show. They want to change the world. They want to, educate people, all of those things. So I think that it's probably not necessarily a bad thing, but you can certainly understand some of the journalists talking about, the end of the podcasting market. Because actually, podcasting is certainly changing away from the fast bucks, I suppose. Yeah,
the only other thought would be, if so many people are being driven towards video, as it kind of seems to be, once again, that doesn't, if you go on YouTube, it's not a podcast. But if there's a lot more people doing that, video is so intensive. You mentioned it at the start of the show that we did that. And I'm very much moving away from that myself because it is exhausting, to be honest. It is a lot more work. So when there's more work, there's more people. When there's more people, more financial decisions need to be made. So I could definitely see if there's more video podcasts in quotations there, I could definitely see that becoming a more consolidated thing, because that's where you just need to start having more people working on a product, on a podcast once again, to make that actually financially viable.
Yeah, I mean, just the amount of work involved in video. Whenever I've looked into it, I've thought, oh, wow, there's just like so much hard work. It always reminds me of, getting to the end of a TV show and you see the credits go and you go, how many people worked on this seemingly simple looking show in comparison to a podcast or comparison to a radio show? So I always find it absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. I'm trying to avoid doing as much with video as I possibly can. I've got two people wanting to talk to me about TikTok, what Pod News could do on TikTok, podcast movement. And I'm very, I'm very open to the conversation, but I'm kind of there. Are you on TikTok, Kyrin? You're a young person. You'll be on.
Yeah. I have it, but it's not a thing that I use per se. I've always been a kind of non-entity on social media from 2014 through 2019. I had none, unless you consider WhatsApp a social media. Not really, because it was more for messaging. And almost all the ones I have now are under the Mere Mortals brand. So I don't personally enjoy doing it myself. So I have it, but yeah, I don't use it as the typical person would.
Yeah. No, indeed. Well, it's always interesting to see what happens there. One more story, and this is about podcasters getting paid for the stuff that they do, but the Spotify redux, I suppose.
Yeah, so Spotify has announced an integration between Patreon and Spotify, allowing all creators to offer Patreon-only content to Spotify listeners. That is news to me, and I'm really interested to see how that'll go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So basically, you will be able to connect your Spotify and Patreon accounts, you being both a creator but also a listener. That means that you can access, if you're a listener, you can access Patreon-exclusive podcasts right where you're already listening to your favorite audio content. What, in Apple Podcasts? That's according to Spotify. So, they've been doing this for some time with Supporting Cast and Supercast. Obviously, Patreon is a very large thing. Many people use it. And so this theoretically should allow anyone to produce exclusive content and to stick it straight into Spotify. The interesting side note of this is that, of course, because Apple Podcasts also deals with these private RSS feeds, then Patreon works on Apple Podcasts as well. You don't get the fancy user experience, but you still get all of that as well. So I find that really interesting. And that's kind of clearly a different model to value for value. What are your thoughts in terms of how it compares?
Yeah, I think so. I actually used Patreon not too long ago to support someone who I wanted to, and I found the whole experience just jarring. The platform that they used, they had video on there. And it was just, they were using a Vimeo hook in or something like that. So the whole experience of it it felt like I was paying for a downgraded experience, which is not a good business model because I just couldn't justify it. As much as I love this creator, I just couldn't stay on there. And that's when I would go and look at something like value for value, and I go, I can do all of the same things that I want to, listen to their content, access it if it's on YouTube, and I really like the comment section there, listen to it there, but then just have the ability to readily and easily contribute back to them. So I guess you could say you would be able to do that, but the Patreon is kind of a paywall. So to get their stuff, I had to go into Patreon. So yeah, I think probably from Patreon's point of view, it's definitely a good deal because you can have people coming in accessing Patreon stuff, but it is through a mechanism they're used to, like Spotify.
Yeah, and of course, Patreon, you end up paying for it as a patron with your credit card and everything else, so you don't necessarily have to learn anything new. Although there was a story last week that Patreon has changed the company that it uses to bill the credit cards. So instead of billing the credit cards out of California, it's now billing the credit cards out of Dublin in Ireland, which of course is foreign land to many Americans, and so therefore their credit card companies have blocked those payments. And so quite a few people have seen in this month, they've seen a much lower amount of supporters because all of a sudden they've seen a bunch of bounced users, which is a little bit of a concern. I don't know whether you've seen any of that. I have to say I haven't, but I don't know whether that's been an issue on your side.
No, not personally. It is funny though hearing things like that, and on the Podcast Index Mastodon there was I suppose like a little investigation by John Spurlock into some of the numbers coming out from Fountain using OP3. And he was noticing a lot were coming from Nepal, of all places. And a lot of them were actually tuning into my show, which was really funny because it's like, well, are there Sherpas on Mount Everest? Are they the ones tuning into mere mortals? And they look like legit downloads. Maybe they were being done through a VPN. And this is one of those cases where you go, if someone from Nepal wanted to support the mere mortals, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee or any of the, I suppose, standard, even PayPal. I'm not sure they'd be able to do it from there. And then this is why, being able to do it, within the podcasting app using just money which anyone can kind of get, this being Bitcoin, that does make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch, I think, and interesting to see how all of that works. But certainly, Spotify moving very much into offering the same sorts of things as Apple Podcasts has in terms of paid subscriptions, although I'm not quite sure what money Spotify gets out of this, if anything. If I was to make something with Patreon, does Spotify get a cut of that? I'm not very sure. So it's probably worthwhile a dig into the release to find out more information about that. But if there are people, and there may be some people who are still a little bit vague about the whole notion of value for value, you have a whole podcast all about that, don't you?
Yeah. It's definitely one of the things that inspired me to change how I was doing podcasting. Funnily enough, you were the introduction to it for me, James, because I was watching, I can't remember, this was during COVID times, and you were presenting somewhere on an online conference, so nothing in person again. And right at the end, you talked about this Bitcoin thing and Adam Curry and value for value. And I came away thinking like, okay, so does value for value mean Adam Curry is going to give me Bitcoin? And I mean, funnily enough, he has boosted in the show. So the wrong prediction came true. Yes. But yeah, it was essentially just the idea of exceedingly simple. I provide value up front, and then I just ask that you return it, and it can be in many different forms. And that idea is just really stuck with me since then, for its simplicity, and then also getting into the nuances of it, which is what I do on that show, to explain, if you are using like something like Patreon with the paywall, you're blocking your content from a lot of people who would access it. And then it's the question is, okay, well, are you doing it for the money, or are you doing it so that people can listen in, so that you have something to say and share? So yeah, it is really, really fun, and I've been enjoying doing that show.
So one more story, and then we'll go around the world and we'll do some jobs and stuff. And you were talking about a lot of listeners to one of your shows in Nepal, but there's one company which is going a little bit further than that, aren't they?
Yeah, so Co-Host has announced Advanced Audience Demographics, a tool to offer data on audience age, gender, household income, interests, and hobbies, family members, and social media consumption and habits, and maybe they'll even brush your teeth for you.
Yes, it's a worrying thing. What do you think when you see stories like this, where they will work out exactly whether you're a boy or a girl, and whether you like, going on boats, and and you use TikTok and not X? What are you cool with this, or are you running a mile?
I'm one of the ones who privacy has never really been my thing as a real concern. In the large scale of things, yes, but for myself personally, I don't really care. I remember reading a book once about how this family was using, it was something like Target or Walmart, and they had magazine pamphlets being delivered to their house. And just based on the purchasing decisions of the youngest daughter, who was, I'm going to guess like 16, 17, something like that, they were starting to receive all of these baby pamphlets really targeting, and the mum and dad didn't even know, and it was just based on the decisions of what the daughter was doing, and she didn't even really know. So that's one of those ones where you go like, whoa, okay, if Walmart knows I'm pregnant before I even know, that's a bit concerning. That kind of stuff feels gross. It feels a bit wrong. But on the just personal side for myself, I've never been overly concerned.
Yes.
How about for you, James?
I've got my Woolworths Everyday Rewards card, which is a supermarket here in Australia, not a company that sells you pick and mix that somebody else has pushed their fingers through, which of course is what it was in the UK, and records, vinyl records. Used to sell vinyl records. So I'm very cool with companies going through all of my data in that regard. Slightly less cool in terms of online, it has to be said. But I think that there's going in eyes wide open. I think the way that this co-host thing works is that there's a bunch of data brokers out there who spot what you're doing at the end of your IP address and understand what's going on in your household. So they're looking at my IP address here, and they can spot that there's somebody here, searching for dresses and searching for women's shoes, and they can probably put two and two together to work out that might be my wife, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's how it works. But I'm always kind of there thinking, how reliable is that really going to be? Which of course is the other thing.
Yeah. A good illustration of this is, have you heard of WorldCoin, James?
Have I heard of WorldCoin?
Yeah. So WorldCoin is a cryptocurrency token thing that's being.
Oh yes.
It's recently released, and basically what you do is there's a big orb, and you go up and you scan your iris into it, and it'll give you $25 worth of this WorldCoin thing. What is the equivalent of that if you converted it? And this is meant to be done in a way so that we could have a global money that's, there's no bots, there's no bad stuff going to happen from that. And it was actually co-founded by the guy who made OpenAI, Sam Altman. So he's kind of created the problem and then is trying to fix it himself. And the hilarious thing is that it's just not working. There's people who are getting their family and friends to come scan their eyes, but then they will take the money for it, or a percentage of it. And even the WorldCoin people, I believe they said they would sell that biometric data on to governments, or they would give it to governments, but maybe they would sell it on as well. It's just like, if you're going and willingly giving your data up, it's like something as, I guess, personal and private as your iris, which is pretty big security concerns for.
Exactly. It reminds me of a great podcast. It's also a book as well, and I've just finished reading the book, The Missing Crypto Queen, which is made by the BBC and looks into OneCoin, which is, they're still selling OneCoin even now. They're still selling OneCoin, even though it's clearly, so much of a scam. It's unbelievable. And it's well worth a read or a listen, depending on how you go. The podcast itself is fantastic and is well worth it. So there's a thing.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a thing. Let's go around the world. In the UK, new radio audience figures, which showed a growth in radio listening. Are you a radio listener at all, Kyrin?
No, I can't stand ads, so I listen to podcasts in my car.
Ah, well, there you go. There is such a thing called the ABC. It's ad-free. It's very good. I think the interesting thing about the UK numbers were that 1% more people are listening to radio now than were a year ago. There's probably 1% more people in the UK, to be fair, but they're listening 1.8% longer. Speech stations, though, were down. So all of the talk stations, whether it's the BBC, whether it's the commercial stations, all of those were down. And I'm wondering whether or not some people have been talking about news avoidance and people just find the news too depressing to listen to. I think another reason might be the launch of lots of high-quality podcasts, and they're doing exactly the same as you're doing, and having listened to those in the car rather than the depressing news and stuff like that. So maybe that's the thing.
Yeah, could definitely be that.
Maybe podcasting has killed the radio star. I can't believe I've just I said that. Anyway, let's take a quick look at some jobs. There's a job for a producer at Podmasters in London, as a freelance audio documentary producer at 2SER in Sydney, Eora in Australia. And if you're looking for a job, you can find more of those. Pod News has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world on podcasting's largest jobs board. They're free to post as well. It just takes 2 minutes to add a new role. podnews.net/jobs is where to go.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk. Of course, Adam Curry publishing a new episode of Boostergram Ball this week, and the one of the music artists that he played, and in fact he played her twice this week, Ainsley Costello. She has said that she has received more than $104 in 2 weeks from the plays on Boostergram Ball and others like it, which compares to April, where she earned from 60 different platforms. She earned $22. So there's definitely something. There's definitely something here. You've presumably listened to both, because I think you were very excited by them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been very excited for this for a while. I remember when one of the first people to put music in a podcast like this, or at least it related to podcasting 2.0, was a band called Abel and the Wolf. And they had a whole podcast about their process of creating it, of making the chapter art and images, of getting the music together. And it was really cool. And I followed that pretty religiously when that was coming out a year and a half ago or something like that. So yeah, definitely interested. That number itself, I'm pretty sure she crossed over 1 million sats, which is that would be even closer to like $200, $300.
Yeah.
So it's it actually had a pretty big impact on her. And I believe you did a show as well, James, and I actually listened into that one.
I did, yes. I did a short show called James's Random Music Show Thing, which you'll find if you are using a Podcast Index compatible player. You won't find it on Apple or on Spotify for fairly obvious reasons. That was, I tell you what, making it, because I was just keen to understand how the whole thing worked. And there's nothing better to understand as a writer about this stuff. There's nothing better to understand how it works than actually just doing it for yourself. So learned an awful lot. I tell you what, incredibly complicated right now, because there are no tools. There's SplitKit and there's Sovereign Feeds, both of which are impenetrable for me. I'm sure that, Adam, who's been using them for the last 4 years or 5 years or so, is completely comfortable with it. But blimey, it was super complicated. I wasn't doing it live, which would be even more difficult. But there was a thing. So it was back to my days of being a radio DJ, of using a calculator to work out timings so that the RSS feed worked. But that was really interesting. Any interest in doing that on your Value for Value show?
I will actually do that next week, but I will not do
Is that an exclusive?
the value time splits. yeah. I will not do the value time splits. I will make it easier, and I'll just put the artists as a percentage of the actual episode in. Yeah. But there's like you were saying, there's so much cool stuff coming out, but for the average Joe like myself, who doesn't know how to code, who looks at a command line and is horrified and scared, it is a lot to take in. So it's really awesome that people like you and Adam are kind of trailblazing and experimenting with these things. And I will just say, for those problems that you are having, at least you have the background in radio, so you can do all of the smooth intros and outros, and it was very, very professional. I was highly impressed.
Why, thank you very much. I'm available for hire. It was good fun to do. But I think the other thing that, of course, is the issue is that there's very little music out there that's actually available in this format, that you're allowed to play. And I think one of the reasons why my thing was only 21 minutes long, one of the reasons was, the point wasn't to do a full music show. The point was to understand how the whole thing worked. But the other thing was that actually the amount of music out there is so low that I feel for Adam having to do an hour-long show every week with the very small amount of tracks which are available out there. So hopefully more musicians will get involved in this and more people will be uploading their stuff. I did also find a bunch of cover tracks, cover songs on Wave Lake, which I'm not putting that in in a podcast, because at least I know that if it's a Beatles cover song, then I'm not allowed that. Because the publishers will still want some money, because Lennon and McCartney composed that particular song. So I'm kind of there going, I recognize the Beatles track, but there may well also be other tracks that are on there that are cover versions of other songs that I'm not aware of. And that's a little bit worrying as well. So a whole world of trouble if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the thorny type of Napster shenanigans, where the record companies, they've shown that they're not too happy about people accessing music in different ways. A question for you though is, when you were on the radio and you are looking for new music, how would that work as a radio station? How would you access a new song to play?
Well, I mean, on the radio, typically you would be given those songs. You'd be sent those songs. I mean, I'm old enough that they would be. I'd be sent those songs with CDs, not with vinyl. I'm not quite that old, but so they would send those songs in, and then you would listen to them and you'd work out which were worthwhile playing. But of course, the music licensing was that basically anything that we wanted to play, we could, because we had the blanket agreements, whereas podcasting, very, very different. So, only having the agreements to play songs which have a value block, realistically, and so therefore only being able to choose from the Wavelake catalog or the Wavelake catalog plus a few others is it's a bit harder on that front, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's just see what happens in a year's time, and maybe there'll be other various entities like Wavelake popping up, because you only need probably a couple of musicians like Ainsley spreading the word of how much you can, even just the financial aspect of you put it in one place and you earn 5 times, 10 times what you do from putting it in 60 places. There's a whole lot of incentive.
It also helps if you record a decent song as well, which is
very important,
worthwhile bearing in mind. And the other thing that I heard Dave Jones talking about this week on the Podcasting 2.0 podcast, which is taking a couple of weeks off while Adam jets around Europe, is talking about anonymous reporting of player stats, so that you can get better podcast searches. So you can basically go, okay, we know that these are popular shows in terms of consumption, so therefore those should go at the top of the list, which I thought was interesting. And I wondered whether Dave had considered pod rolls. I don't know whether you've ever used the pod roll in terms of helping people understand other shows that they might enjoy. Kyrin?
Yeah, I have played around with it. Once again, this was absolute hand-holding on my part by the good folks as Buzzsprout, because that's where I host 2 of my shows. So I just asked them, could you put in these 3 GUIDs in and do it? So I believe that was the old method, not the newer method. So that does work. And if you go to Podfans and type in mere models, you can see my pod roll there. So I have done that, but yeah, that sounds very similar to, I guess, the Google PageRank algorithm or things like that, right? Where it's the amount of linkages to a particular page. Yeah, something similar for podcasts. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if a show is getting recommended by lots of other shows, you would kind of assume that would be a good signal, I guess, to actually show that. But, so the pod roll, I think, is a really interesting plan. You have 3 on your pod roll at the moment, which, of course, you can see on the Pod News website as well. You've got Mere Mortals book reviews. You've got Value for Value, I think. And you've got the Podcasting 2.0. show. Not this show. I do notice.
No, well, I might have to change that. Buzzsprout, expect an email.
But there we are. And of course, Buzzsprout is our sponsor of this very show, and we thank them for that. Let's take a look at some upcoming events and awards. New plan. We're going to talk about one upcoming event other than our own. And the one upcoming event I'm talking about is Podcast Movement, which looks as if it's going to be a busy one. The host hotel has sold out, astonishingly. The organisers have secured discounts at nearby hotels, though I think nearby is a comparative thing. It's the hotel is in the middle of nowhere, although it's sort of relatively close to the airport. But nearby will be a small car away, I would have thought. But
where's this being held at?
So this is being held in Denver, in Colorado. It's being held at the Gaylord Resort, which, as a Brit, I find hilarious for reasons that I'm not going to go into. And it's a big hotel as well, really big hotel. So the fact that the hotel has sold out is pretty impressive. So looking forward to that. I've just opened my calendar for people to be able to book half hours with me during the event, and already regretting it. So that should be.
Will these be at the bar or not?
Well, that's what I plan on. What I do have a rule that it's only off the record if there's some alcohol in my hand. So which I think is a good plan. But anyway, that should be fun. And of course, Pod News Live in London, happening on September the 27th. Podnews.net/live is where to get tickets. There are still some available. That's very cheap to get to. And so I would heartily recommend that. You'll find it in White City in London, so where the television centre used to be, and in fact where This Morning still comes from, I understand. So there's a thing. If you haven't bought your tickets yet, do get them before they sell out, because they really will sell out. Podnews.net/live is where to go. Somebody was asking me what the nearest airport was and what the conference hotel is going to be, and my reply was that the best airport is Heathrow, because it's just the best airport. In terms of a hotel, anywhere, because it's really easy to get to. So but that should be really good. And then the British Podcast Awards on September the 28th as well. There are more events, both paid for and free, at Pod News. Virtual events or events in a place with people, and it's free to be listed as well. Podnews.net/events is where to go.
Boostergram
Corner
on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Oh, yes, it's our favourite time of the week, and quite possibly your favourite time as well, Kyrin. It's Boostergram Corner, of course, and a bunch of boosts, both for the Pod News Weekly Review, but also for Pod News Extra, which last week had a full version of the interview with Adam Curry through a very scratchy StreamYard connection that Sam insisted on using, that Sam will not be using again. But thank you for listening to that. So we've got a ton of boosts from both of those, haven't we? What were some of the boosts that we got in, Kyrin?
Yeah, so I'll read out these first ones here. So on the Pod News Extra, there was 100 sats from Real Coach Andy. And he said, good to hear you guys again. Thanks for the news, guys. And so that was with talking with Adam Curry on that episode there. I'll do another one, the 12345 from the Tone Wrecker, and this was also on the Pod News Extra. It says, excellent historical update with Adam's recap of the steps to reach this moment. Bravo. And I definitely think there is some really cool stuff going on, which is why people are going into the Pod News Extra, which is a show which is you don't promote that often. It's always kind of in the background, but
hidden away.
It's
hidden away. It's where the stuff that doesn't fit goes. That's what that's for. I have a feeling
that would be on your pod roll, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. I mean, I have a feeling it should be. It should be a little bit more full after Podcast Movement, because my plan is, at least on one of the days, if of course I've got enough time, to go around the exhibition hall and talk to all of the exhibitors to find out what they're all doing there and what they're, pushing on their stands and stuff, and make that into a podcast, which should be quite fun. So if I manage to do that, that might turn into an episode of this show. It might turn into a Pod News Extra episode, but however it works, worthwhile keeping your eye on that. We also got Boost 2,100 sats from this person.
You put the cereals up for the mess you made, but I'll leave it out too long. It's cereals up.
Oh, yes, it's Ainsley Costello, the Wavelake #1. And she says, thank you, Sam Sethi, Adam Curry, and Wavelake. Thank you, Ainsley, for giving music a place to be valued for the indie artists, which is a wonderful thing, isn't it? To actually get a boost from the music artist who you've just played. So there's a thing.
Yeah. From sats that were kind of recycled through.
Yeah.
they're going back and around and all over the place.
There's an awful lot of recycled sats. And talking about an awful lot of sats, this is, I even get to play this jingle. Yes, because this was a proper big baller boost. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sats. Who's this from, Kyrin?
Oh, it's a handsome devil, whoever, we might not know who they are.
It's from you!
Yes, it was from me.
Thank you so much. What is it that you ended up saying here?
Yeah, so I was saying, so this was for the Pod News Extra, and I said, boosting so people can see how revolutionary Podcasting 2.0 and V for Music actually is. What dragged me in from the get-go was the emphasis that everyone receives recognition for their contribution and can also benefit from the flow of money. Kudos to Adam. And as an aside, this is a personal one for you, James, and for Sam. Pod News is just an awesome show. And I'm glad I connected with you that long time ago, found out about Pod News. And it's definitely a weekly listen for me. At least this one is, so it's actually very cool to be on this show and kind of see how it's all done as well,
and see all of the stuff behind the curtain. Well, thank you so much. That's a large amount of sats, so we will spend those in some way, shape, or form. Maybe we'll spend them as part of. I'm trying to get Sam. Sam should come to Australia, and he is talking about coming to Australia next year.
Oh, cool!
So
it'll almost certainly be at the time where I'm traveling.
Oh, quite possibly, and probably I'll be going and talking in other parts of the world as well.
That would be amusing. Yes,
but it would be great fun. So yes, but I definitely want him not to just go to Sydney and Melbourne as everybody does, but to actually see a little bit more of that
for sure.
So that's a fine thing. You also sent another set of sats through for this show, saying, glad it's not just me who thinks that the Boostergram ball is something special. I just finished reading The Long Tail. Oh, did you? And this feels like one of those industry-changing events. 2222 sats, that's a row of ducks. Is that a big row of ducks or a small row of ducks?
I think that's
it's just a row of ducks,
isn't it? It's just a row of ducks, I guess. Yeah.
There's a jingle to go with that, but I can't be bothered.
No, don't do it.
So thank you so much for that. And also thank you to Brian Ensminger. Apparently I got the name right first go. Nice. So he says, you did great with the surname. The first attempt was right. So not Minger. I did say Minger, and then Sam said, no, it can't possibly be that. But again, I mean, it goes back to Gaylord. So there we are. Anyway, he's given us 1,701 sats, which apparently is the Star Trek boost. What does that mean, Kyrin?
I have no, the Enterprise, something, I don't know. I never watched Star Trek, so there's all sorts of numbers.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows how all of that works? Anyway, if you get value from what we do, the Pod News Weekly Review is separate from Pod News. Sam and I share everything from it. We really appreciate your support because it really helps us continue making this show. You can become a power supporter at weekly.podnews.net and support us with your MasterCard or your Visa card or your American Express. Or you can support us with sats by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. If you don't have one, podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new app. What new podcast app do you use, Kyrin?
New one, I guess. Podfans is the obligatory one.
Yeah, very good.
That we must say.
If Sam wasn't listening to this show, what would you say?
I have tried actually using Podcast Guru recently. I do like the cool thing with all of the niche apps is they all have something that they do really well, and so it takes a bit of experimentation to find and exactly so. Podcast Addict, for example, man, the functionalities in the back end of that, of if you want to skip, if you want to have silence, if you want to have this put here and that put there, man, that thing is powerful, and it's almost too much. It's So
Podcast Addict is it's a real. I think powerful is absolutely the word. It's also it has its own idea of style.
Yes,
I think is the thing. But yes, I haven't played with Podcast Guru much recently. It does look like a very nice looking app with a bunch of really good features in there. What's the thing that stands out for you?
I mean, for me, it's almost the simplicity of it. If you went onto something like Fountain, for example, I can see where you could get overwhelmed because there's so many tabs, and if you click on another tab, then another 5 tabs show up. So it's there's definitely, for every listener out there is what they really care about and what they don't care about. And yeah, I definitely found Podcast Guru was one of those ones where it doesn't give you many options, which is, it can be nice in some cases where you just go, I just want to type this thing in and I just want to listen. I don't want to do anything else. So, with that being said, it does have the boost functionality in it. So you can do that. But it's certainly not as maybe front and center as some of the other apps make that functionality.
Yeah, no, indeed. Now, this is the part of the show that we normally ask Sam what his week has been like. So what's happened for you this week? What's a typical week in Kyrin's life?
Well, so I actually will 2 hours after this has ended be chatting with Mikhail Christensen, who is a hand balancing circus artist. So that's going to be really, really cool for me. And I spend a lot of my week doing hand balancing stuff. So, preparation.
Very cool.
So yeah, there's that aspect. I've been experimenting with going live on quite a few of my shows. So recently with the Value for Value one, and there's a whole lot of things to learn. If you want to get a chat going, you need to learn that. If you want to play jingles and stuff in that, you have to find other ways of connecting audio. So and I'm also looking at doing a kind of self-hosting shim type thing where I host maybe my shows on Buzzsprout and then be able to just play around with writing my own, adding some extra things into the RSS feed and kind of
to the
linking
RSS
to that.
feed. Yeah.
So I might be doing that. We'll have to see. And I currently have 48 foam panels sitting around, which need to go up on the wall. So I'll be spending some DIY time and sticking things all over the place.
Yes, I have. This room is possibly the most echoey room ever, and at some point, I mean, what would make sense is just to put some rugs on the wall or something like that. But but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I've dilly-dallied for doing this for a while, but for whatever reason, I got them recently and was like, all right, I gotta do it.
Yeah, no, that makes a bunch of sense.
And so, what happened for you this week, James?
Well, I've got my hair cut, so that was nice. So I was there getting my hair cut in Toowong Village, and the lady who was cutting my hair said, and I purposefully pretended that I didn't hear her. She said, "So, is it? Are you working today, or are you retired?"
Oh no!
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I know that you're cutting off my grey hair, lady, but So yes, I felt very old after that. So that was fun, and I've spent much of the week rather weirdly battling my Amazon servers. It turns out, so I run a media directory. And the media directory that I run has lots of logos for lots of the TV channels and lots of the radio channels and everything else. And it turns out that, those dodgy, illegal internet boxes that get you 4,000 channels from across the world. All of those, it turns out, were hard-coded to pull all of the images because they were all the same size and the same, and looked quite decent. All of those logos from my server.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was there, and I've just changed all of the security, and I've changed all of the addresses of the logos and everything else, with the result that there are all of these set-top boxes out there that are all trying to connect to my server and all getting errors now. So hopefully they'll all go away and stop costing me money.
Yeah, wow.
But yeah, that's been entertaining. But anyway, that's been what I've been doing this week, and that's it for this week.
You can give feedback to Sam and James by using email to weekly@podnews.net, or send us a Boostagram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We're hosted and sponsored by Podnews Live and Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy. Thank you, Kyrin.
My pleasure, James. And happy to do it anytime.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.